Look out!
Surging up from the depths of the sea.
Horrifying, mysterious creatures whose attack on people sends the whole countryside on an endless search.
Unless something is done, and done quickly.
Is this the end of our civilization?
You'll pioneer with us the perilous descent into the unknown.
What does that mean? What are you even talking about?
A deep, penetrating dive.
In the last calm and reflective moment, before the monsters came.
Humanoids from the Deep Dive.
Welcome to the podcast Humanoids the Deep Dive, where we dig deep into the monsters and context of your favorite monsters and monster movies. Each episode will see guests and myself talk about an important movie monster or folkloric monster and what it means to us and generally, using everything from history and philosophy to films and folklore. Today's episode, I'll scale back a second. Our topic for today is one of my favorites, and I was going to say one of the favorites of everyone at the show because we're all nerds, but I can only speak for myself. I'm very nerdy, and I really love this topic.
Me too.
And, okay, I can speak for all of us. We all really love this topic because...
Yeah, that's fair.
Cool. Because we didn't talk about that, ladies and folks, monster friends
Ladies.
outside the show. We didn't talk about that beforehand, so I didn't want to go too far afield. We're talking about American nuclear monsters, the 1950s beasties and tall humanoids and all sorts of creatures back when they knew they were afraid of radiation and had no idea what it could actually do. So they just made stuff up they were afraid of. And it was very creative. Whole lot of fun. We're going to focus up front on probably the best American nuclear monster film, Them. Often stylized with an exclamation mark, making it more like Them. I'm your host, Jeff Ewing. I'm an entertainment contributor for Forbes and writer for Looper and Slash Film. Host of this show, and you know if it's monsters, I'm obsessed with it. And I'd also like to introduce our fantastic co-host for this amazing episode that I'm super looking forward to. Please say hello, Michael Vaughn.
Hello, Michael Vaughn.
Hello, Michael Vaughn.
Oh, everyone says hi to Mike. I love it. And Andre Couture.
Hello, I am Andre.
Andre Bot.
Yes.
I am Andre. I love it. The gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I really look forward to deep diving on this with you fine folks. And folks at home, thank you as always for tuning in. So to kind of start out with Them, it's so 1954 was a really weirdly good time for monster movies. You have Them, which is arguably the best of the American nuclear monster crop, especially like the large, like radiation makes small things really, really big tradition. You also have Creature from the Black Lagoon. You have Godzilla over in Japan, which is a phenom. It was one of our first episodes because it's so amazing. So 1954 was a really particularly good time to like monster movies in the era, and Them, which has proven really influential over the years. It influenced even Aliens, was heavily influenced by it. Basically, Aliens pretty much ripped off all of them and just put xenomorphs instead of giant ants. It was.
They should have called Aliens with the exclamation point, just to drive the point home.
Exactly. That's what they don't tell you is, there's that apocryphal story of like James Cameron at a meeting just writing a dollar sign in front of Alien.
He also put an exclamation point, but they were like,
yeah.
I don't get it. And then he erased the exclamation point, and then he looks back at the class and then smiles.
Oh!
And then they give him a standing ovation.
Exactly.
That's how it went, right?
Exactly, with like a single tear in each of their eyes. Yeah, James Cameron loves this, was heavily influenced by it. We love it. So the general plot summary, while investigating a series of mysterious deaths, Sergeant Ben Peterson, played by James Whitmore, he finds a young girl in the desert who's traumatized and really kind of having difficulty even speaking because of the trauma that she's just from what she's just seen. So the sergeant joins forces with the FBI and a scientist, and they start to investigate and realize that there's been a whole lot of attacks in this community because of these massive ants that have been mutated by atomic radiation and then are threatening to spread across the entire country. So they have to destroy these ants the size of, military vehicles before they destroy all of the things and all of the peoples. It was it's funny because I've shared many a weird monster movie with friends and family of mine that like to know or are curious about why I think monster movies are cool enough to have a show about them and to whatever. None of the co-hosts on this show, they all get it. I know, they're same type of weirdo as me. Fortunately, you got to find your tribe. But when I'm trying to explain it to other people, there's a set of movies that I like to show them to be like, oh, hey, this is super cool. And it's not the usual suspects. And them is always one that people are just like, oh, that was actually good. Huh. Very reliable in that regard. Which one of you fine folks would like to start with your review?
You can go ahead, Mike. I'll follow you up.
So I really like them. I will say one of the things that I think is so kind of amazing about the movie is the setup and build up to the actual ants. It's kind of amazing because you only hear it, you only see how traumatized this little girl is, and I think that is such a genius way of introducing the movie and building up this tension to when you finally figure out what it actually is. It is the build up worth the payoff. I mean, I would say marginally yes, but just seeing how terrified that little girl is, and then you having to use your imagination if having never seen it, of what scared her to the point of I don't know, being catatonic. So and I just love how you hear it. It's alluded to, and then I think it's a good 20 or 30 minutes till you actually see the which again is so brilliant. And I think that it would be kind of interesting to watch this with a modern audience, because I don't think that they might be used to that kind of prolonged sort of build up. But again, I think that's kind of what's genius about the movie. So
yeah, absolutely.
I really love it. 5 out of 5, 5 out of 10.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. But we'll get there. Thank you so much. You brought up some of my favorite aspects of it. Andre, what do you think, good sir?
Yeah, a lot of this is gonna sound the same across the board, but it's not one of the first giant monster movies by any stretch of the imagination, but it does some things that other movies like that didn't even touch, the messing with the audience based on the sounds of the creature, leading you to create this image of what that could be, making these terrifying sounds. if anything, the poster is a little bit of a spoiler for like the first half of the movie, because people are trying to figure out what the hell these things are and what they can do. But then, you know, everyone who like even hasn't seen the movie before knows like they're giant hands, you know. So, but they still lend some sort of some terrifying qualities to them. Where if you think of ants as like barely visible creatures that you don't really learn that much about because they don't affect you in that large of a way, when they're giant and basically preying on humans, then you learn their powers, attributes, whatever, pretty quickly, because they're at this stage not friendly. So it's, I don't know, it's a wonderful flip. It's like almost a nature run amok mixed in with a nuclear scare kind of angle to it. And the character writing is really good. Like, it's way better than I ever thought it was going to be. I have to say, I put off watching this for a little bit too long, but once I did, I was completely blown away. So yeah, it's a 5-star out of a 5-star movie for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I definitely, similarly, like I did initially gravitate towards it because the monster movies that I grew up with are like the classic Universal monsters, and then some of the stuff from like, the 70s and the 80s. So like your Alien, your Carpenter, your Body Snatchers, but not but the 50s stuff that inspired all those later ones was really kind of a bit of a question mark for me. So I came back to start looking at some of these movies that inspired, John Carpenter and a lot of the people that I really idolized. And I came back to them, and it was really shockingly good. I was like, I thought it was going to be fun. I didn't know it was going to be great. I got to say, I agree with everything both of you have said. Special shout outs. The young girl is played by Sandy Desher, and she did a wonderful job at a young age for a performer of really selling the terror. And back in 1954, a lot of full adult performances were not as good in having emotional gravitas as her performance as a child. Like, things were hit and miss back then. There's the stone cold masterpieces. A lot of the 50s had a lot of Billy Wilder films and Hitchcocks that were like top shelf even by today's standards. There's also a lot of drivel, but she nailed it. I love, like you both mentioned, especially you, Mike. I really loved the sound design and the use of because we can't really, unless you're a superhero I don't know about, hear ants little sounds to themselves unless it's heavily amplified, right? So to have it amplified for us, it sounds very alien, and it really feels like it is everywhere in the film. It is 360 to surrounding. So you kind of get the terror when you can't see them. And I mean, ants are disproportionately strong, and they're menacing. So if they were the size of a car, they could lift a building, and do serious damage. And there's so many of them that it's a really frightening premise for what it is. And I thought they executed the scares well. The effects were pretty good for 54. When they actually showed the large ants, and then like, yeah, I just feel like at a technical level, it was really well executed in ways that kind of made it scarier than a 1954 science fiction film should be. I really love it. I love watching it with people for the first time because people are surprised by exactly how good it is. And I also, unsurprisingly, would give it a 5 out of 5. A couple fun facts that I learned about that film specifically. Where is it? So when the movie was first released in Sweden, it was called The Spiders. Uh, I am. Those are different things. I don't know why it would be called The Spiders, but apparently, according to the fine folks at Turner Classic Movies, apparently it was. For context, them is part of this, tradition of American nuclear monsters that, ergo the title of the episode, that really kind of came as a result of Cold War fears, right? So obviously the U.S. dropped nuclear weapons on Nagasaki and Hiroshima very tragically, and that was terrifying. But then in the post-war era, we knew what terrible things nuclear power could do, and with Soviet Russia being a post-World War II antagonistic power, and they had a bunch of nukes, there was this, growing fear of the nuclear menace, and eventually it kind of translated into both film, and then also there was a lot of in comics too, which is why a lot of the really early, for example, like Marvel heroes, the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and the Hulk, are all just like, oh, maybe radiation can make you a Spider Boy. I don't know. It can make you a big green guy. I was reading Jekyll and Hyde. Okay, sure, it can do that. To make up a different type of radiation. So all these things stemmed from how the U.S., creators and studios and whatever have processed the nuclear fears of the time. Obviously, Japan had their own large monster tradition starting also in for America, it didn't start in 1954, but the tradition of kaiju films, the first and arguably one of the greatest movies of all time was 1954's Godzilla, where there's a lot of comparisons you can make between their treatment of nuclear monstrosity and ours, and we'll probably end up getting to some of that, but the fact remains that they treated their movies are a lot more cynical about like the government, the powers that be, and scientists, and their ability to do anything other than accidental bad things, versus some of the parts of the American tradition. I will mention, though, briefly that one of the first good nuclear monster films was 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which boasted some killer Ray Harryhausen effects and inspired both subsequent American movies and also inspired Godzilla. That film was pretty fun. Basically, it's a fictional dinosaur, the Radosaurus, which was released from hibernation by a nuclear bomb test. And it just starts smashing shit. So it's a good time. A good time was had by all. There was lots of screaming and some cool special effects. And it was so good that it inspired a whole bunch of other creative properties. And weirdly, it was Warner Brothers, and it was successful enough that it greenlit for them the following year, which was Warner Brothers' most profitable film in 1954. So it's a tradition that had legs, fiscally speaking.
Little ant legs.
Lots of little ant legs. If you really wanted me to be afraid of a large nuclear bug thing that grew to a large size, I'll give you two. One, praying mantises. Those things are freaky even when they're small. If they were giant, no. They got size instead of hands. It's freaky. Two, millipedes. If we're going to talk about giant radioactive legs,
oh god,
those things are gross. And they're predatory. And Can you imagine just hearing like the stomping of little feet and you're like, oh no, it's a whole bunch of millipedes. Like, no, it's just one. Just rampaging forever. Terrifying. That's my random aside.
And I don't know if there are any giant millipede movies, at least from that era.
I didn't come
But
across
there is one of a praying mantis that breaks out of an iceberg. It's not really nuclear, but it's like prehistoric kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's almost like in the same avenue as the Blob, except it's not from outer space. But it could still be, I think, shoehorned into that.
Yeah.
But the movie's really not that exciting beyond the giant praying mantis.
Yeah, it's basically like one of those movies that's like primed for a remake. Because like the idea has some potential.
It's a good Mystery Science Theater episode, though.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true. I endorse that.
Kind of speaking of things that sort of skirt the line and actually has a direct connection to them is the original The Thing from Another World, which both has James Arness in them, and from roughly about the same time. The original The Thing was 1951. This was 1954.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I mean, I know the remake's better. I'm, of course, talking about the 2011 The Thing.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously. The greatest. It's not even the greatest film starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead. But...
but, yeah, like, you know, the Thing from Another World definitely isn't really atomic age, but I feel like it kind of, you could still sort of like put it in that like Cold War anxiety of the other. And it's so interesting though, like looking back, and I'll pivot because this is a little bit off topic, but you know, you were saying about how these movies have a very like cynical kind of approach with the military and like the government at large. And it's so interesting because the original The Thing from Another World is like almost like patriotic, but also very cynical of the government at the same time. Like it's this really interesting kind of tug and pull. Although it is like very anti-science. Like the de facto villain besides the creature is like the one gung-ho scientist that wants to just learn and study from this thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's the bad guy.
Yeah, it's so interesting, too, because some of these films, like, the American ones were a little more optimistic about government than the Japanese ones, which were just like, America bad and scary, our government inept and incompetent, and the only scientists that could really do anything are the ones that make weapons that we shouldn't have made. So it was like pure cynicism versus like there's at least a counterbalancing in not all but many of the American ones that were like, okay, there's rogue scientists, there's scary technology, but there are also sometimes good scientists and sometimes, you know, good, you know, even if the government's kind of bad, there's always like, you know, like a good FBI agent, you know, like someone that's, it's like a balance. They try and have like a balance of good and evil because probably if you were too critical, you'd get labeled a communist. So you have to like, in the 50s, you have to keep that shit on lock.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole like Red Scare thing in Hollywood, that could be a whole episode on its own.
Yeah. And you know,
oh yeah,
I'm thinking how much more biting of a satire or a series of satires these movies would be if the blacklisting in Hollywood had gone any other direction, or if we hadn't gone into the Hays Code as early as we did. At least as far as Hollywood films go, where I think there would be a lot more freedom in these movies for even just like the directors. Maybe the screenwriters probably did, but I think it was shaved down a considerable amount before they could get a real shooting script. But of like really adamantly pointing the finger to these institutions that not only allowed the creation and testing of like these knowingly like debilitating and civilization destroying weapons, but just being okay with not knowing what comes after that, even if it affects themselves. And I think that's probably where some of these movies get to, in some respects. Maybe not as much as they wanted to. Whereas, like, I think the American nuclear monsters are as much of a fear of other countries using those types of weapons or things in that area on us, but also if we had used it on someone else, and that sort of comes back to bite us in the ass, like cursing like the whole world because of like a petty country versus country warlike scenario.
No, absolutely.
Almost like karmic retribution.
Definitely. And I think between that and Mike, what you were talking about with some of the other films in the area that aren't necessarily nuclear, but are like Alien Menace, Robot, Day the Earth Stood Still, stuff like that. That's kind of where these traditions all definitely like intersect with those overlapping like Fear of the Others, you know, because you have the extraterrestrial ones that are just like, well, what if a power that was stronger than us did to us what we did elsewhere, you know, or could, or threatened to. And then you also had this fear of like the perceived to be equally powerful Soviet Union with its nuclear arsenal and its strong military. That was always that kind of like cultural Cold War counterpole, you know? And so there's a lot of overlap between all these themes and both the kind of external power, alien menace type stuff, and then also the nuclear fears type stuff.
I mean, plus, I mean, if you look at the time that we were living in, this was post the Second World War, but then also you had the Korean War that was like currently going on, which was like early to mid 50s. I'm not a war historian, but it was somewhere in that time frame that we were in the Korean War.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just verifying that, but between 50 and 53, that's...
Oh, okay. So yeah, in that...
yes.
So, I mean, even though, like, you know, them was 54, I mean, we were still kind of... That was still very fresh in the public eye.
I mean, and then culturally it had, like, a pretty big impact for a while. I mean, look at MASH, which was made afterwards, you know?
Yeah.
Like, we forget about it now, but nobody forgot about it then.
Yeah, the country that, or the countries that we invade or, you know, let's just say invade.
We can be accurate.
They will never forget that. Yeah, they'll never forget our transgressions against them, like whether or not like the conflict was justified in any means, but like the way that we went about fighting about it is always going to like just burn images into the minds of and the lives of people who have been significantly affected physically, mentally,
right,
everything. So yeah.
Absolutely, because if you look at it like I mean, there are arguments to be made that dropping, I mean, the justification for dropping nuclear weapons on Japan, which was absolutely fucking terrible thing to do to people, was the justification at the time was that it was necessary to win that front of World War II. But, you know, was it though? Like there are
it was complete overkill.
Yeah, there are scholars that basically now, in historical hindsight, have convincing arguments that it wasn't even strategically necessary. So it was just the worst thing that a country has done to another country, and it not like a strategic reason could have made it more like less morally abhorrent, but it wouldn't have. But they didn't even have that. It just happened for its own sake as something that, you know, I feel like Americans at the time kind of expected to have to answer for at some level, you know? And then subsequent, you know, history and, you know, Vietnam and Laos and all these other parts of Asia where it was just like, you know, under the guise of fighting communism, but it was really just a succession of like territorial power plays and war crimes. Like for many countries in the world, the US has long been the bad guy throughout the Americas, throughout Asia. And we like to think of ourselves as a liberator, but that's not really, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like the movie that best sums this up is Team America, World Police.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that didn't have a giant monster in there, because that would have been a great way to just like really hammer that point home.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently that movie was such a nightmare to make. Maybe a little bit less than a year after that came out, the Chiodo brothers did a convention. I think like the very first Monster Mania Con, like over 10 years ago at this point. So they were like, oh, are they going to do a sequel? And they were like, hell no, because it stressed Trey and Matt so much that like they would never ever want to do something like that again. But they were like, I feel like they were supposed to do like a giant monster movie at one point, and it just didn't happen.
I vaguely remember something about that.
But yeah, that would have been kind of awesome if they had somehow like threw a kaiju in there somewhere. But
I think that we should. This is going to surprise everyone. I hope everyone at home is sitting down. I think we should have a kaiju in everything.
Yeah, Sound of Music. Moth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
the hills are alive, and she's like spinning on top of the head of a kaiju. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, I probably would actually watch it then.
Yeah, it would be worth your time under that.
But you know what? I think James Gunn did a pretty good job in taking that Team America attitude a little, definitely way more toned down, but like with the Suicide Squad, especially with his usage of Starro, which I think is a perfect amalgamation of both like the American nuclear monsters, even though like they're not fighting it in America, but it's like on a facility that's just very Quatermass 2.
It's like America's fault that thing occurred, you know?
Yeah. It's like we're not even keeping it on US soil. We're keeping it over in the Maltesian Islands, and
that's run by a dictator that we puppet,
sweeping it under the rug.
You know?
Yeah.
Puppeting dictators is the most American.
Who was going to marry an American?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
There you go.
No, but I'm glad you brought that up, because it does definitely like bring a lot of those forward with being like very real about U.S. political actions. Bringing the kaiju in there. I still think they did dirty by my boy Starro. Team Starro for life. He just wanted to watch the stars.
Who knows if he's really dead, though? I mean, I'm not entirely convinced that like Starro is completely gone.
Oh, you know? Yeah. There's an argument to be made there.
Listen, he lives on in our hearts, so is he really gone?
Starro. Exactly.
We have a starfish in all of our hearts.
Here, I'm going to pour one out for. I'm not going to waste coffee, but in my heart, I'm pouring one out for.
You're going to pour one out into your mouth for Starro.
Like, here we go. So
starfish to mouth.
Oh, somewhere Limp Bizkit is laughing.
And chase it with the hot dog flavor.
Oh wow,
Right?
we're so mature. Thanks.
So
Durst.
Cold War.
So anyway, the complex geopolitical legacy of U.S. colonial projects. I wanted to kind of take a bit of a pivot back to topic because I wanted to ask you guys, what do you like? Are there other? Because there's so many different nuclear monsters. Not all of them are big. In the 50s, really cool stuff. Do you all have any other favorites?
Yeah. There's one that I'll mention as a lead up. Although it doesn't have any monsters, it has the same kind of feeling of dread and hopelessness that a lot of these movies, or at least if they were trying to convey, they came about a little half-heartedly, with like the giant monsters and stuff. It's hard to cultivate dread when you have like a big doofy monster that's just like stepping on people. But the thing about nuclear fallout is it can be even more terrifying than like whatever gigantic version of a smaller creature that we can ever like dream up. So I just want to talk a little bit about the movie Five, which is it's a small ensemble piece from, I want to say, the 50s for sure. But it follows 5 survivors in nuclear fallout where the U.S. has developed these special kind of nuclear bombs that when they're dropped in heavily populated areas, they destroy all organic matter, but they leave like buildings, cars, other structural things like bridges and other roads, like those are kept completely intact, but only the humans die. It gets a little hokey because, it's the 50s and they're still coming up with a lot of this, but it comes pretty close to being really terrifying. And like the 5 survivors, they kind of settle into these archetypes of how they had lived their lives prior to the bombs dropping. And when they realize the Holocaust that they're now emerging from, they self-assign themselves like these roles. Like, you go leadership, you go support, maybe complete denial and like just wanting to go away from it all, maybe even like into like areas of self-harm, just wanting to remove yourself from this world or situation. And it's, like I said, there are no monsters in it whatsoever, but I think it deserves a mention. And I don't know where the movie is available, but I feel like it's pretty easy to find, although it's hard to describe more without kind of talking through the whole movie, but there's like an American idea of neo-fascism that comes through, which is equally more terrifying, especially now, where that you could use that as your monster allegory. Because there's one person who he talks through his own subscription to the idea of like a Superman in like a very terrifying way, you know, almost like Hitler's belief that he had some kind of like superiority, like physical superiority over other people.
Okay.
Which it's kind of like thinking that you are turning into a physical like other, which is a little bit more cerebral of a monster than any of these other movies. But I feel like that's a necessary stepping stone, especially for American cynicism. It's far beyond satirism. It's full on cynicism.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm going to pivot from there to one of my favorite post-Holocaust American monster movies, and that is Robot Monster. I love this movie so much. It's almost like Five, except there's just like a family in like New Mexico or something, some southwest area of the United States, and they're terrorized by a giant gorilla guy with a metal bucket helmet with the TV antennas, and he has a two-way like video radio communication that makes bubbles, like literal bubbles, and he is tasked with killing the rest of the humans on the planet who have been unceremoniously missed by their gigantic bombs, and he just cannot seem to do it. He keeps failing at every turn, and then he ends up falling for them, which is great. It's like a can we all just get along at the end, which is like in the lens of like this Cold War fear and like nuclear scare and everything. In retrospect, could be seen as a little bit of a slap in the face of like you're really not taking this seriously or in stride. But the way that the movie goes is it almost points to how slightly out of touch some of the producers executives were when they were like, why is it so bleak? Like let's put some fun in there. Like they got to survive by the end, right? So I think even if you don't think it's a good movie, it's worth examining, I think, because it is a reaction, and it's a valid reaction to like post-nuclear attack or possibly self-inflicted Holocaust or just bad luck for the U.S. at least.
That sounds fantastic, and I'm trying to see if the folks at home can watch it for free. I think you can get it on YouTube. Yeah, you can search.
There's also there's a Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, I think, of Robot Monster.
There should be. Cool. Yeah, so folks at home, you can rent it officially and formally. You can purchase it, as I'm probably going to do after we're done recording. Or you can Google search it and find it on the YouTube. And it sounds amazing. Thank you for that, Andre. Mike, any favorites of yours that we have not broached?
Yeah, so this is technically not the 50s. This is the 60s, but it is Horror of Party Beach. You can see that.
Yes.
I've been meaning to get the Blu-ray from Severin, but for right now, this is what I've been rocking.
It's beautiful.
So most of y'all are probably familiar with the Mystery Science Theater episode, but it's a really fun radioactive sea creature monster that looks like he has hot dogs in his mouth.
Yeah, kind of looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon, but like playing Chubby Bunny the whole movie.
It's like you got the creature from the Black Lagoon from like Wish, maybe even more bargain basement than that.
From Hollywood Boulevard, he's just like pining for photos.
But yeah, it's a pretty fun movie. It's one of those movies that it definitely, I think, has a level of self-awareness and like tongue-in-cheek quality to it. Like there's no way that there wasn't some kind of like acknowledgement that this was kind of crap. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really like the kind of like beatnik surfer kind of monster rock and roll kind of fusion. It is so painfully of its time that it's pretty wonderful. I've tried to watch it without the MST3K commentary, and it's still pretty good. It's certainly one of the few movies from that show that I probably would actually watch without the, outside of the Mystery Science Theater, guys. But Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's one of those that it's kind of one of the perfect summer movies, I think.
We need a program like a summer.
It's a great beach movie.
It's perfect. Here's the thing. I was never that into those beach movies that they made, but dang nabbit, that one has my attention. This is what they needed the whole time. Beach blanket bingo with monsters. I'm there.
Or there was wasn't there like a ghost beach movie with Boris Karloff?
Oh, which one was that?
The ghost with the invisible bikini or something like that.
You know what? That's a little.
Yeah, it was the ghost with the invisible.
The ghost that is. I've never seen that one.
That's a great title, though.
That screams Boris Karloff.
Well, damn it! Now I want that poster. That's hilarious. That is a great title. God bless you, Boris Karloff.
I have a feeling the title is so much better than the actual movie, but
it does have Karloff in it, though. So there's If seeing Karloff again is the worst it gets, we're fine.
Unless you're Bela Lugosi, and then he's a limey cocksucker.
yeah. I love Karloff, but I'm always Team Lugosi. I will die Team Lugosi. My Antifa Dracula. I love that gent. So Antifa Dracula. That's going to be the name of the movie I make about him. Anyway, I'll cut that from the episode so nobody steals it. Thank you for that, Mike. I will definitely check that out. And the Ghost in the Invisible Bikini, because why not?
It's a bonus.
I wanted to kind of rep two films from 1955. One of them is good, and one of them is fun. So probably the second best of the giant nuclear monsters ones of the 50 is Tarantula, or excuse me, it's stylized. It's Tarantula because it has that exclamation mark also. Where it's basically them, but with a giant, massive tarantula that's rampaging the countryside. It's another one that's actually like really weirdly good. The actual juxtaposition of them filming this tarantula and superimposing it on, with the human actors and these regular landscapes was actually like really well done. And it's not quite as good as them, but it's still really fun. It's a good watch. So I'd recommend folks check that one out if you feel like it. And then also in 1955 is The Creature with the Atom Brain.
That was one of the ones I was going to
bring.
There you go.
Pretty great song, too.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, it's a great song.
So it's funny. I had the DVD of it for a very long time, and recently replaced it with the
Cold War Creatures.
The Cold War Creatures set. But it's this weird one where so an American gangster gets a Nazi scientist to create zombies for him using like these radioactive this radioactive like science experiment that reanimates the brain stem and allows them to be also like controlled, and you can kind of see through their eyes too. And so he basically has a Nazi scientist make radioactive like zombies from reanimated corpses, and it's schlocky, but it's actually it's very fun, and it's actually kind of scary in certain parts because the concept is scary, because the treatment they kill a lot of people, and the treatment can turn them into subordinate zombies pretty quickly. So it's like, imagine if there was an evil gangster that, was his radioactive zombies were killing people, and then his army was just growing very quickly. It's a very scary premise, even if, it's kind of a goofy film. It's still really fun though. So.
Yeah. It's almost like zombie by proxy,
Yeah.
but through like mad science. It's a weird mishmash of
Yes.
things, but it tends to make a lot of points. And it's interesting that it starts the story by following organized crime
Yeah.
and the failings of police investigation. I think it's trying to say something there.
Yeah. And then also it has a little bit to say about the use of Nazi scientists and the perils of trying to use Nazi scientists for other ends, which our government infamously did. And so coming out in the 50s, you know, it has a much better edge to it than it should. And it's a really interesting use of the radiation fears to make it a different kind of film. Let's see. I would also recommend that Cold War creature set altogether is a really good 4-pack of films. Like I love basically everything in that set, actually.
Yeah, Jeff, did you also have that, like, before you had the Blu-rays, it was like the Sam Katzman collection?
No, I had the individual titles. I didn't seek out the actual collection.
Yeah, there
I should
was,
have, though.
I think it was like all of the titles were just from that DVD set re-released.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the transfers are super good in the re-release. But I had the Giant Claw. I had Creature with the Atom Brain. I think the only one I didn't have was like the Zombies of Moratau or whatever it was. But I like that one. It's just like I found it hard to find. But yeah. Any other recommendations for we pivot?
I got one real quick one. I'm sure we're going to mention some other ones in passing because of just like history of cinematic portrayals of nuclear fears. But I think one that does get purposed pretty well, especially still during the Cold War, but after the fact of like the initial bomb / fallout / nuclear radiation scares, would probably be a movie directed by Donald G. Jackson. And you probably already know what I'm going to talk about, and that's Hell Comes to Frogtown, which is very much a nuclear monster movie. Although it's a little bit more Fallout oriented, where like there's a double-edged sword here, where there has been an apocalyptic event, World War III, something like that, and not only are like the main populated areas of the United States complete wastelands, it also mutated some like flora fauna life into basically giant, for their size, anthropomorphic frog creatures. And they've built a civilization. They have some sort of resilience to like contaminated, irradiated like water and food stuffs, and they're already like mutating from there. But it's also rendered every single male human being that still survives as completely sterile. So no one can have children at all, except enter Rowdy Roddy Piper, who's the only guy on the planet that has bankable sperm. So it's basically Escape from New York, but with mutant frogs. And instead of saving the president, he has to impregnate as many princesses from like Frogtown as possible to just kind of like instill hope back into the human race. And it's in hindsight, a little xenophobic, especially when you're including these frog creatures and they're always set on the other side of the fence. Like they're not considered trustworthy enough to develop any sort of relationship with. Like maybe here and there, like as an inside contact, but only for the job that's being done here. So there's something to be said about how it's generally untrustworthy of especially creatures that were created out of human error. So but all in all, I mean, it's a really fun movie, and it doesn't come back to those themes at all because it's a little bit on the surface. Sure. But if you dig a little deeper, you can definitely get to some underlying themes that may or may not have been put there deliberately. But I mean, it's definitely worth a watch, especially in like the retrospective attitude of nuclear monsters as they were introduced in the 1950s.
Yeah,
just in a different way.
Absolutely. I would also add that it also allows you to do a Roddy Piper 1988 double feature where he has characters with very like double entendre level names. So he's Sam Hell here, and then in They Live, which is a stone cold masterpiece, he's John Nada. So it's a perfect 1988 Roddy Piper double feature that I would wholly endorse.
And also very xenophobic, but for good reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Because the other are bad. They're rich people. So for that one,
with their digital watches.
Yeah, like we have one that can see. Oh man, I gotta watch that again. But yes, thank you so much for that recommendation. The only other thing that I will mention, and then Mike will end off on you, is also read any of Marvel's output in the early 60s, because in the early 60s, like the at least the massive nuclear monsters were throughout the 50s, but in the 60s you started to see a lot more of it infiltrating comics, and a lot of Marvel's output of that era were vaguely defined types of radiation causing certain mutations that gave people powers. So you have like the gamma radiation that made the Hulk in 1962, in the Incredible Hulk, May 1962 specifically. You have a radioactive spider biting Peter Parker in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in 1962. And then the first Fantastic Four, Marvel's first family, were hit by ill-defined cosmic radiation and mutated to shit in 1961. So early 60s Marvel was just like, we need powers. Radiation, pumped out all the early heroes. So I really think they need to do like a whole different tradition of like 1960s heroes and put it in the 1960s, and it's all weird radiation and old, like, just radioactive people punching Nazis. That's what I want to see, Marvel. Feige, hit me up. There's my rant. Mike, do you have any final recommendation, good sir?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, if we're going to talk about like radioactive monsters, I think we should definitely talk Toxic Avenger. That's a huge recommend. And I think it's interesting because it also kind of ties back into like the 50s and the 60s stuff, because that was obviously something that probably very much influenced Lloyd Kaufman, to make something with sort of an 80s spin, because, that's why you see a lot of great 50s movies being remade in the 80s, like The Thing, The Blob,
The Fly.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers was technically the 70s, but close enough.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's other ones I'm not thinking about, but Yeah, it's like this really interesting like nostalgia cycle that we're going through. In the 80s it was like the 50s and 60s. Now it's like
Mm-hmm.
for us it's like the 80s and 90s that we're super nostalgic for.
Yep.
So Toxie's awesome, and
Foxy is awesome.
I don't know what else to say. It's just it's you can see why it's kind of the flagship of Troma. I think it's easily one of the most creative and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yep.
a little bit hit or miss with Troma, especially
Ditto.
new Troma, but
Yeah.
Toxic Avengers easily my favorite.
Yeah, I still remember like.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
go ahead, Andre.
oh, just going to mention that that one's also getting a remake coming pretty soon.
Oh yeah.
Although they're being a little picky with how far along they are with that.
Yeah.
But with, if I remember correctly, Peter Dinklage playing the titular Toxic Avenger.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
So
I'm super looking forward to that one.
I want to see that.
It was funny because fun fact, one of the earliest, like Toxic Avenger was one of the earliest sort of schlock cinema films that I saw growing up. Because I grew up in Eastern Washington, not a lot of that got out there in the early 90s, but I had a buddy. I was like, oh no, okay, come over to my house, we're gonna watch a movie that I really love, and it was Toxic Avenger. I'm like, this is awesome. I loved it so much. I have a very soft spot in my heart for good old Toxie.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I have a similar experience with that and Cannibals the musical. That was one that was a buddy had the VHS, I think, because I'm old. And it was kind of amazing because his like parents kind of didn't give a shit what we watched, so it was like, hey, I got this tape and it's hilarious and weird, and it's definitely one of those movies that I think really holds up.
Yep.
Spadoinkle.
Oh, I love it.
Great.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. We ended up just kind of organically doing a lot of deep dive stuff up front because you have to contextualize this set of monsters.
Yeah, you can't really talk about these without like addressing that
right
pretty quickly after.
Yeah, because they'll be like, oh, like why like radioactive alien things and big ants and weird zombies? Like, why? Fun fact, because they were absolutely terrified at the terrible things they've done and could be done to them. So
yeah. I wonder if there's like, there's different classes to the approach of the genesis of these monsters or creatures in these different movies. And like, there's the like, if we can go to Japan real quick for 1954's Godzilla. There's a big difference between the I'm gonna wait for my cat to jump. I can see her. Nope, she's not. She's just looking.
Contemplating.
Okay. There's a big difference between oh, there she goes. The Japanese immediacy of having this inflicted upon them and then needing to say something about it.
Yeah.
It's wholly necessary, and I want to say cathartic in some ways, but I can't say for sure because I don't identify as Japanese. I'm not from that country.
Yeah, and it's hard to say also not living in that era too, specifically. We have so much removal.
But there's a weight that comes with telling those stories that the United States kind of appropriate in a way. And the one thing I do want to address is the United States then appropriation of Godzilla by making it an American film after it had done so well in Japan, but not realizing why.
Yeah.
I think it's this tone deafness that you can supplant in, like, thinking that you know what American audiences will resonate with that Japanese audiences did. And this is still specifically the Godzilla Japanese release versus the Godzilla US release.
Yeah, the 56.
And it was also very xenophobic, where they kept all of the footage of the original Godzilla, Japanese Godzilla, but by shooting brand new scenes with an American actor just reacting to things, because producers and suits did not think that American audience members would identify with a foreign person's fear of their own country being destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that's said there, and it's not the first time that they've gone back to that well. Like, I would even argue that, like, the American Godzilla movies now have no business being here.
Mm.
Every once in a while you get a good Godzilla movie, but, like, we're kind of missing the point, I think. And, like, we continually miss it.
Yeah, I think you're I mean, I love the Monsterverse films. I love that there's a whole Hollywood franchise that's committed to, like, Hollow Earth theory.
Yeah,
great.
There's some great stuff in there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
However, I do think that you're right that they are missing something inherent, and you can even see that in their treatment of, like, the origins of Godzilla, right? Because, like, in the original Godzilla was a thing that radiation changed, right? Versus in the Monsterverse, it is something that was just that way, and a time it was woken up, right?
Yeah.
So it's more like a part of nature, and the Monsterverse does interesting things about kind of a Gaia theory approach of, like, how we're not really. It has interesting ecological implications in what they're doing, but it is a fundamentally different thing, and you can directly compare when you see, like, Shin Godzilla from a similar era that sticks to the original tone of the 54, and it's like it's like a creature that was rapidly evolved by radioactive, like, bomb drops and tests and stuff, and into basically like a massive hate machine that lives for destruction. Like, it's just a fundamentally different feel and set of implications, and I like a lot of what the Monsterverse stuff does and what its implications for the environment, etc. But I do think you're right, Andre, that it kind of loses some of the original power and purpose of the original Toho Godzilla lineage, you know?
Yeah. And, like, I'm not saying that these movies need to go back to that in order to be and feel authentic, but, like, when you make, and, like, admittedly, I still haven't seen the first Godzilla of the Monsterverse, so I can't say anything about that one, but when you go from King of the Monsters, where it's basically just throwing everything at you, it comes off as kind of glib and like cheap in that regard, sure. Especially coming from this conversation. But by the time you get through Godzilla versus Kong, there's like a self-examination of systemic failings that are specific to this country that I think makes it a better lens to look through for that for movies like that take those intrinsically foreign properties to try to make a statement about something. I think it works better when we're examining ourselves as a country to then superimpose like these giant monsters. Even if you throw in fucking Hollow Earth theory, there's vegetables in the center of the earth. There's no gravity. Sure. I mean,
there's both gravity and there isn't.
Yeah. But the fact that we're following a side character that is so despicably suspicious of like his own government, even the place that he works for, that he actively rails against it on his off time. Like, there's nothing more American than that. Like, and I think that's what these movies are missing, is like they're using these giant monsters as a substitute for like a real identity or purpose. And when you get there, like in Godzilla versus Kong, that we can actually start making some real statements. And like, yeah, King of the Monsters is like it's a fun effects driven thing, but there's nothing really there for me that gives it that deeper meaning that even Creature with the Atom Brain had like something underneath the surface.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, for me, and I'm interested in your thoughts too, Mike. For me, I do think that it takes a more Gaia theory approach to being like, we're not the top of the food chain, and we've been destroying the Earth, and the Earth's going to destroy us back. And Godzilla's like, all of these emerging kaiju are part of like, almost like the Earth's immune system against something out of alignment, aka us. I think because that flies in the face of the anthropocentrism that underlies our civilization, I guess, in the West, in the US. If you can call what we have a civilization. I do think that it has some intellectual power there, even if sometimes it fumbles more than others. But I also agree that there is something lost when you desituate it from the culture that it came from and their concerns and their critical lens on like U.S. War atrocities and colonial tendencies and other things and imperialism. Like I think that is a meaningful loss. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
And kind of to that effect, and Andre, I think what you brought up was really interesting and something that I never really kind of considered until now. But so I guess when they did the Godzilla versus King Kong, I guess pretty famously, Kong was supposed to be like America, which I think is interesting because I think the original King Kong can maybe be like an allegory for slavery.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So to that end, I think it's kind of interesting when you have like the remake of Godzilla versus King Kong, which one is steeped in more Japanese culture and history, and then the other one you could see as definitely more maybe like the American kind of inverse to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see that. There were rumors too that there were like for the 1962 one that there were different endings even, but I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Dramatically different cuts though. There's the U.S. Universal Pictures cut, and there's the Toho Pictures cut. It's been a while since I've seen them lately, so I can't say for sure that I remember what they were.
Yeah,
but I think they both ended the same way.
Yeah. I will say one thing that was woefully missing from the Monster vs. Godzilla vs. Kong that was present in the 62 is that they gave King Kong random electrical powers in 62 that they promptly forgot about. Yeah, exactly. He's like just walking along being a monkey and just be like, oh shit, I gotta like absorb electricity and use it against Godzilla. Where was that? Legendary.
Yeah. I will say I really, really enjoyed the new King Kong versus Godzilla.
I loved it. Yeah, it's
easily my favorite.
Yeah. Now, gosh, forgive me because I can't think of the guy's name, but it was kind of cool because he came up as like I remember like his very first indie horror movie, Pop Skull.
Ooh.
And then
he just
huh?
I'm trying to remember his name. Sorry.
It was Adam Wingard.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
That's right. And it was so interesting because I was thinking like I can't remember if it was an interview, some kind of interview he did. I can't remember if it was like written or a filmed interview where he was like, doing my first feature, I had so much, like, just saying how like crazy hard he had to hustle just to get that feature made. But now he's, doing huge tentpole films. I think that's, I mean, it's a super dumb tangent, but I think it's fucking awesome. I love that.
No, I'm happy for him because like some of his earlier stuff, I know that like the Death Note and his Blair Witch were met like a little middlingly, right? But I will say his earlier films, You're Next and The Guest, are great. You're Next is great. Like movie, it rips. And The Guest, super fun watch.
What's his name is pretty cute. The lead
Dan.
guy in that.
Yep.
Dan Stevens.
I know exactly what Dan Stevens.
Dan Stevens, the man who invented Christmas.
Yes. Yeah, I love Dan Stevens pivot. I love these actors that are in these like major franchises or whatever, and instead of getting like pigeonholed into just being like handsome or whatever, they're just like, no, weird shit only. Like, because he left Downton Abbey and then started making things like The Guest. Like,
yeah.
God bless you, Dan Stevens. Apostle, Legion. Dan Stevens is great. Like, I just love that, like, less of a heartthrobby, but I love that Daniel Radcliffe is like in the most popular franchise of its era, and then he proceeds to do weird stuff like Horns only. Like, you have a blank check.
And he's playing Weird Al in a biopic, and like, I can't wait to watch the fuck out of that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's not a giant monster, but I'm sure they'll mention one at some point.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like Elijah Wood. I like how not only does he do weird movies, but he's like a pretty awesome producer. Like his, it's criminally underrated, but his No Man of God is so great. The Ted Bundy movie.
Yeah, it's good. I think I watched that because we were both covering the fest, and I think I watched that because prioritized watching it because you spoke of it so highly. It was a super good film. Yeah, I was like, okay. But yes, so Dan Stevens, Elijah Wood, Daniel Radcliffe. I also say Robert Pattinson. For trashing Twilight while on the press tour for Twilight. That's a mensch move. Good job.
I would throw Kristen Stewart in there too.
Absolutely. Personal Shopper's great. She's good in so much weird stuff. Bless the lot of you.
Have you all seen the new Cronenberg movie yet?
I have.
Not yet.
Ah, you lucky fucker. How is it?
Okay.
It's an earful.
First of all, okay, I'll back up. It's very Cronenbergian with the body horror. It very much feels like a classic Cronenberg film. So I found that wonderful and refreshing, and I'm all for it. The thing that I was going to say first that I hesitated on was that it got so much press for like being too disgusting and people walking out. It's not as bad. It's not as hard to watch. Not as bad, but as hard to watch from a gross out perspective as that. That was kind of overkill. I liked it. I thought it was good. I actually thought I could have gone a little farther in parts, but I had a good time. It feels like classic Cronenberg, which to me is literally always a win. So,
yeah, and his like son is really crushing it too.
Possessor's great.
Like, so is it as gory as that one? Because I know Possessor was like pretty next level, which I love. So
yeah, I would say yes, but it feels a little different because there's a lot more practical gore and grossness versus like well done digital, but still digital hits a little different.
Yeah.
Like there's sheets of fake flesh. I'll put it that way.
Well, how would you compare it? Like, if you were to put it side by side with like Dead Ringers, something like that?
Yeah, I would say that it's like, I'd say that it's about on par with Dead Ringers and like a little less like body warpy than like Videodrome.
Okay, yeah, because Dead Ringers is a very like internal body horror.
Yeah,
specifically of the other, because it's like the two brothers basically mutilating and governing the opposite sex's bodies, but internally. And what I've seen of Crimes of the Future is the externalization of that, near monologue of like one of the brothers' speeches on like the beauty of the internal body.
Yeah,
like,
I would say like 100%. My one caveat is it kind of also revisits those from because like the lead character is growing these new types of organs just kind of as part of just the consequences of the time they're in. His body just does that. And there's talk of like an inner beauty pageant where people who are doing that showcase their novel new organs. And so like that inner is not, the outer stuff is more the focus for Crimes of the Future, but those themes totally carry over otherwise.
Okay. Yeah, because thematically it looks similar, if anything, by contrast in some ways to something like Dead Ringers.
Totally. I thought it's fun. You know, ironically, my least favorite part of it was Kristen Stewart, and I was surprised at that. She's not terrible. It's just that, you know, I don't know. She has a very unique performance, but not unique for... It just hits kind of odd. I'll just say that. But Case, do please still come on the show.
Yes.
Happy to have you. Wonderful. Well, Jets, thank you so much for introducing both of you those new kind of like avenues of the thematics, and God, just really love this period of films because there's so much weird stuff they're doing. Folks at home can check out our earlier episode on Godzilla, where we really, really dug into that tradition, or our Quatermass episode where we go kind of across the pond to some of their treatments of science and the alien in a similar era.
Did we talk about Starro in some previous episode? I feel like we did.
Yeah, I don't remember which one though, because Starro's running perpetually in my brain.
Yeah, I feel like he's gotten a bunch of like mentions. So honestly, the only way to know for sure is by listening to every single one of our episodes, and then you can report back and tell us how many times we bring up Starro.
Yeah, please tell me in the comments.
62.
And exactly. And also, you're welcome. So definitely listen to every one of our prior episodes, and thank you for listening to this one. And with that, yep, thank you all so much, folks at home. And I'll start with you, Andre. How can the folks at home, how can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter under the handle DemoniDisco, DemonIDisco. Twitter. I write some film reviews for Geek Vibes Nation, and other similar articles over at Celluloid Consomme at medium.com. So you can check those out there. If you happen to be listening and you find yourself in the Seattle area, I'm also a film projectionist for the small, weird Grand Illusion Cinema Theater in the University District neighborhood. And yeah, I think that's it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Andre. I would definitely encourage everyone at home to check all that out. Mike, tell the peoples what amazing things you've been up to.
Well, first you can find me on Twitter at StrangeCinema65. I have my book, The Ultimate Guide to Strange Cinema, available on Amazon. And as far as projects go, I have, I've been writing also for Geek Vibes Nation. And I also have two shows. I have Return of the Living Geeks, which I do with Andre.
That's right.
And we've been doing live streams for charity, which has been going really well. And I also have a home video show that I call the Video Attic, which you can also find on Geek Vibes Nation YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And again, folks at home, I would encourage you to check those things out. And you can, again, find me at Real Jeff Ewing on Twitter, REL, like Film Reel. And you can find my stuff on Forbes and Looper and /Film and here, because you already did. And I was just like, taking a step back in my mind, how, man, as far as like shows co-hosts go, y'all do some cool stuff. Like Luna is an aerialist. Mike, you're like a strange cinema expert. Andre, you're a fucking projectionist. That's baller. Like, y'all are cool.
Yeah. It hurts when
I have cute
pop
dogs.
the eyeball out because the lens has to come out of the head.
Yeah,
it's a lot of hard work. It gets really hot. But we just got AC, so it's a little bit better now.
I mean, it's good timing for that, because otherwise, thank you folks for stopping by, and for the folks at home, we'll see you next time, fellow humanoids from the Deep Dive. Once more, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our guests this episode, and to all of you out there listening. From the dawn of recorded human civilization, we've been fascinated by monsters and the monstrous. They've inhabited our dreams and nightmares, they've been our protectors and our villains, they've symbolized our fears and vices, our hopes and potential. Fears of creatures and the night that nourishes them were key inspirations and fuel for the rise of human civilization, the need to get out of the shadows, behind the walls, and into the light. In many ways, understanding our monsters is an important part of understanding our world and ourselves. So thank you for taking this journey with us, we humanoids from the Deep Dive.